Hello everyone, and welcome to today's session on urbanization and the rise of urban disorders. As some of you might not know me, I would like to introduce myself. I am Georgiana Pascutiu, and I am a medical director, part of global medical team at RGA International. This is our agenda. I will start with backgrounds and trends, then move to consequences of urbanization and the health impact and well-being impact of urbanization, and at the end we'll discuss the modern-day applicant. What is urbanization? It's the growth of rural communities into cities. Across the globe and in a short period of time, we've given up the tractor for the subway, the open sky for one of brick and concrete jungle. We are now an urban planet. Throughout history, cities have attracted people as centers of growth, learning, economics, and religion. Actually, by 2008, about half of global population lived in cities. It was just 3% back in 1800s. The first big wave of urban migration started with the Industrial Revolution back in the 18th century and took place in what are today's more developed countries of North America and Europe. But looking ahead, most of the future urban growth will take place in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and it is estimated that by 2050, about 2/3 of world's population will be calling cities home. How fast an area grew or is growing was very important. During the Industrial Revolution, there was uncontrolled migration, and cities were some of the unhealthiest places for people to live. Cities were dirty, crowded places where epidemics frequently broke out. They did not have proper waste disposal systems, and people threw garbage and sewage directly into the streets. The water was polluted by waste, and the air was polluted by the burning coal of the industrial factories. This is a picture of Jacob's Island, London, UK, back in 1840s. It's a famous Victorian slum. Health indicators back then looked much worse in urban residents comparing to rural ones. For example, infant mortality in Great Britain at the end of the 19th century was double in urban residents. Densely populated urban areas had led to a rapid spread of infectious diseases. Malaria, TB, influenza ravaged most civilizations and spread in pandemics across the globe. For example, in North America, cholera outbreaks back in the 19th century killed 50,000 people. Therefore, historically, urbanized places were not healthy, and the only way they maintained their existence was by continuous immigration of people. Spectacular advances in medicine and public health helped industrialized countries to overcome the infectious disease threats. And now, mortality rates look much better for urban residents comparing to rural ones. Back in 2014, US reported a historically low all-cause, age-adjusted death rate of 720 per 100,000 people. Also, as illustrated in this graph, between 1999 and 2014, the mortality rates for top 5 causes of death, which is cancer, ischemic heart disease, stroke, lower respiratory tract infection, and unintentional injuries, were going down, and they are lower for urban residents comparing to rural ones. Urbanization is now spreading, and many of the new cities in Latin America, Africa, and Asia have a completely different feel and look than their older North American or European counterparts. Many of these cities are growing too fast. The risk of fast urban growth, especially in an economically strained country, is that the infrastructure cannot expand fast enough to accommodate the population's growth. Densely populated slums form within the city and around the city, and they represent a huge public health and environmental risk. Slum dwellers survive with no sanitation, security, water, and about 1/6 of global's population live under these conditions. Infectious diseases continue to thrive and have the potential to spread geographically much faster than any time in history due to air travel. Air travel represents a major risk factor for the global spread of a new infectious agent. This was illustrated by looking at the rapid spread of SARS virus back in 2003, when the infection has disseminated from China in 17 countries in less than 1 week. We also see new infections emerging in humans, which are a result of a breach in the species barrier between humans and animals, permitting germs that usually infect animals to infect humans as well. A recent learning lesson was the Ebola outbreak, which had occurred in areas of extensive deforestation and required international cooperation and coordination in order to contain the virus and strengthen the public health security. What are the top 3 megacities in the world? Would it be A, New York City, Tokyo, Delhi, or I don't know, maybe D, Tokyo, Mumbai, Los Angeles? But first of all, what is a megacity? Well, the urban shift over time has led to the emergence of the megacity. And a megacity is a city of more than 10 million people. So let's take a look. What would be the answer to this question? Well, actually, the most populous cities are in the global south. And it's actually Tokyo with 38 million, followed by Delhi, 26 million, and Shanghai, 24 million. And 24 of the world's 31 megacities are in the global south. This picture is of the Rainbow Bridge in Tokyo, Japan. Tokyo, the biggest city in the world. Let's take a look at this graph, which shows the distribution of world urban population by area. It actually shows how it looked back in 1950, then in 2009, and how it is estimated to look in 2050. So by comparing 1950 to 2009, we can clearly see that the urban growth took place, most of the urban growth took place in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And we see that it's estimated that most of the future urban growth will happen in Asia and in Africa. But not everyone grows up in an urbanized environment. I don't know where these pictures were taken, but children on my left, they are in an urban area. We see paved roads, we see big buildings, no nature. And children on the right, they are surrounded by nature, trees, unpaved roads. How will their environment influence their future development, their social behavior, their physical and emotional health? Let's take a look at consequences of urbanization. A big urban area may seem environmentally troublesome, with cities being viewed as a disruption to the natural world. However, urbanization and environmentalism are not incompatible. But the following are some of the consequences of urbanization. Changes in our living standards, our lifestyles, our social behavior and health. Even though some cities are walkable, living in a big city usually means automobile dependency, long commutes, high traffic. But the most important consequences are environmental pollution and its contribution to climate change. What about the benefits of an urban environment? Cultural diversity, improved infrastructure, access to a wider range of food. But the most important ones are cutting-edge technology and easy access and use of public health services. Also, some cities, compact cities, in these cities people live in smaller houses and apartments, leaving large spaces to serve as wildlife habitat and oxygen-producing forests. What about urbanization and health hazards? Well, the effect on health of urbanization is double-edged. On one hand, we have the advantages of sanitation, easy access and use of public health services, and on the other hand, the disadvantages of environmental degradation, pollution, outbreaks of diseases, and also social isolation, depression, stress-related illnesses. Also, people's diets changed, level of exercise decreased, and we see an increased prevalence of associated illnesses such as ischemic heart disease, hypertension, diabetes. Urban residents also have a different consumption pattern than rural ones. They usually consume more food and energy, therefore they produce more energy. And they create these heat islands which have the potential to change local weather patterns, and they also represent traps for atmospheric pollutants. Also, cities radiate heat back into the atmosphere at a lower rate than rural areas, therefore cities are warmer. Our environment is changing on an unprecedented scale. In the past 50 years, human activities, especially burning of fossil fuel, have released sufficient quantities of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases to trap additional heat on the lower atmosphere and influence the global climate. What do we see? We see that the global surface temperature is increasing, and this is causing significant additional cardiovascular and lung disease mortality. We see extreme weather. We see, for example, temperature in Toronto at the end of September of last year, it was 30 degrees, which is unusual for Toronto. The recent hurricane season was more dramatic. We see more earthquakes. Also, vector-borne diseases are highly sensitive to climatic conditions, so we see a different transmission pattern for important vector-borne diseases, a longer transmission season for malaria, for example. It is estimated that between 2030 and 2050, there will be 250,000 additional deaths per year due to climate change. And I would like to talk a little bit more about this because air pollution is the biggest environmental health hazard humans now face. Back in 2012, WHO reported that more than 10% of all global deaths were associated with indoor and outdoor air pollution. Main sources of air pollution are industrial activities, inefficient modes of transportation, household fuel and waste burning. Now, in a recent Lancet article, it was reported that in 2015, now 16% of global deaths are associated to air pollution, indoor and outdoor air pollution. And most of these deaths were due to non-communicable diseases, such as cardiovascular diseases. was estimated that approximately 1/3 of cardiovascular diseases are associated to pollution, but also stroke, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and lung cancer. Particulate matters, mainly sulfate, nitrates, and black carbon, are a huge environmental risk factor for humans as they are penetrating deep into the lungs and in the cardiovascular system. Let's take a look at a couple of studies assessing air pollution and health. The first one, it's a large study from Rome, Italy. They enrolled 85,000 people who lived close to 3 facilities: a refinery plant, an incinerator, and a landfill. And they followed them up for 9 years. And at the end, they reported that particulate matters, air pollution, is not only associated with cardiovascular mortality, but it's also associated with pancreatic cancer and laryngeal cancer mortality. A recent study from US reported that air pollution is also associated with increased risk of chronic kidney disease and end-stage kidney disease. Air pollution also can lead to increase in allergies, as this longitudinal study in Shanghai on asthma trends in youth proved. They showed that the prevalence of asthma increased 5 times since 1990, and this is likely caused by changes in air quality. China reported that the lung cancer incidence is increasing, and actually the incidence is higher in urban residents than in rural ones. Also, worldwide, the prevalence of COPD has increased by 69% between 1990 and 2010. COPD, a disease usually linked to smoking, is also caused by indoor and outdoor air pollution. It's actually estimated that about 1/3 of COPD mortality is caused by air pollution. In many developing countries, the main source of domestic energy is still biomass burning, and this might be an important contributing factor. Encouraging data comes from Canada, as in this 2016 analysis, they are reporting that the incidence and mortality rates for COPD appear to be decreasing. Great Britain and other European countries have reported a decrease in lung cancer, overall lung cancer incidence, since they switched from solid to non-solid fuel in stoves. They are also reporting that the lung cancer mortality rate for males is decreasing and slowly increasing for females. What about cancer and urbanization? Well, some studies, as this one from Ireland, showed that there might be some urban-rural variations in cancer incidence. They looked at 18 common cancers, and they showed that the risk of 12 cancers is higher for urban residents. For example, stomach, colorectal, and lung. Just one cancer, the prostate, was higher for rural residents. However, it might be that rural residents have a different behavior towards disease. They might not seek out treatment, or they might have moved to the big cities to receive better treatment, to be closer to bigger hospitals. Let's take a look at traffic and health and urbanization. This study from England, 2014 study, showed 12% higher mortality risk in cities with high junction density comparing to those with low. And this was all-cause mortality. We can conclude that in developed countries, the mortality rates for non-communicable diseases is going down, and it's actually lower in urban residents than in rural ones. And this is largely driven by easy access and use of healthcare system, and probably treatment to prevent death during an acute manifestation of a disease, such as innovative, time-sensitive treatments in ischemic heart disease, heart attack, and stroke. What about urbanization and developing countries? Let's take a look at this 2014 review, which actually included 11 studies. They showed that in urban residents, there is a lower risk of undernutrition and a higher risk of obesity in children. They also reported that life expectancy was positively but not significantly associated with urbanization. And both urban residents and lifetime exposure to urban environment were associated with a higher prevalence of hypertension, diabetes, and overweight. Cardiovascular disease is of a greater burden in developing countries. And as these countries are still battling infectious disease threats, this is creating a double burden of disease. We can conclude that today's megacities are very heterogeneous, and health conditions are very different. There are big differences in health conditions depending on the neighborhood where you live. An urban area disadvantage is seen in extremely distressed neighborhoods. Urbanization implies a greater concentration of people, which increases the speed at which new infections are spread. And these megacities may be incubators for new epidemics. So I would like you to think about which of the following would you consider an urban disorder? And I listed a few. For example, diabetes, hypertension, maybe mood disorder. What about sick building syndrome? Which one would you clearly associate it with urbanization? Or is it that we see maybe a higher prevalence of these conditions in urban residents because we diagnose more, because maybe they have easier access to healthcare? Well, when I started researching for this presentation, I did a little experiment. I asked family members, friends, co-workers, what would they consider an urban disorder? And they all gave me the same answer. They all talked about stress, anxiety, social isolation. Is modern city life making us lonelier? Well, usually living in a big city means living far away from family and friends, long commutes, and maybe relying too much on cell phones and social media than face-to-face interaction. We are social animals, and we feel the need to belong to others and to connect with one another. And the quality of our interaction is more important than the quantity. Some scientists are talking about a new epidemic, the social isolation epidemic. They are also saying that social pain might be as real to us as physical pain, as it's activating the same areas in our brain. Air travel and advanced technology brought us closer together. It's much easier to connect now. We are more connected than ever. But how do we really feel? What happens when stress doesn't switch off? Modern city life is perceived as stressful, and stress can trigger mental disorders. Our bodies are wired to react to stress in ways meant to protect us against threats from predators or other aggressors. It produces stress hormones. Cortisol is the main stress hormone, but also adrenaline. And it's helping us to deal with the stressful situation by releasing glucose into our bloodstream, so we can deal with the stressful situation. It also connects with areas of our brain which control mood motivation, and fear. When stressors are always present, this fight or flight reaction stays turned on. And this overexposure to cortisol is what puts us at risk for many health conditions such as obesity, anxiety, stress, hypertension. Let's take a look now at this study from University of Heidelberg on how urban life can affect brain biology. Changes in our physical and social environment brought by urbanization can be stressful, and epidemiologists think that stress can trigger mental disorders. So in this study from University of Heidelberg, they enrolled volunteers which agreed to have a functional brain MRI done while undergoing criticism. And they scanned their brain for areas of increased activity. What they were able to prove is that for volunteers which currently live in an urban environment, these ones had increased amygdala activity. And amygdala is implicated in anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues. For those who grew up in an urban environment, those ones had increased activity in the cingulate cortex. And cingulate cortex is involved in stress regulation. So that means for those who grew up in an urban environment, they will be more alert to stress via the anterior cingulate for the rest of their life. This overexposure to stress and over-responsiveness to stress, it's what is triggering mental disorders, what makes us more prone to mental disorders, and the risk is higher for people who are predisposed. So that means if you are someone who is predisposed to schizophrenia, living in a big city might push you to develop it. And where is the best place on earth to be a schizophrenic? Well, according to Dr. Gabor Mata, a Canadian psychiatrist, it might not be the big city with all its innovative drugs. It might be maybe a village, somewhere in Africa or India. And this is because there the connection is not broken. It is maintained. People accept you for who you are. They make room for you to release whatever you need to release or express. They might chant or sing with you. They try to find meaning in your behavior. They accept you for who you are. A society which ignores our emotional needs is one that creates pathology. Let's go back at lifestyle changes and health. Well, again, living in a big city usually means automobile dependency, long commuting time, maybe long working hours, and of course, decreased level of exercise because we don't have time to exercise. And all of this would lead to sedentarism. So let's look at the hazard risk associated with sedentary time. You might remember that a few years ago, scientists were calling prolonged sitting the new smoking. So now there are newer studies, as this one on almost 8,000 people from US. And now what they are saying is that the risk is higher if you sit for longer periods of time. And they also, no matter how much you exercise, if you sit for a long period of time each day, you will have an increased risk of mortality. So you cannot compensate the risk of sitting at your desk for long periods of time with a few weekly visits to the gym. So remember to stand up every hour or so. Obesity is on the rise and is reaching epidemic proportions in countries like the US. But rural residents may not be any better off, as this study from US showed. Actually, it showed that there is a higher prevalence of obesity among rural residents comparing to urban residents. And rural residents displayed poorer diet, less physical activity, and more screen time. But what about food and urbanization? Urbanization is an example of a social change that has a remarkable effect on diet. We all know eating a healthy diet is hard work. The word cooking itself has become anachronistic as we spend less time relaxing and cooking. You might remember that stressed people have high levels of cortisol. So let's revisit the natural stress response mechanism. So what cortisol does, it releases sugar into our bloodstream so we can deal with a stressful situation. It also makes us want to bring more energy so we can deal with the next stressful situation. So what it does, it activates our primal urge to eat rich food, which is usually not the best quality food. However, urban residents have great access to activities which promote health and well-being. So it is our choice to maybe go for a yoga class in the park, for a walk, to be food smart, food conscious. This small study from Japan showed what we all know, that walking in an urban park has benefits, decreases our heart rate and nerve activity. The modern day applicant is varied. Can be someone as scenario A, maybe he's a member of a wellness program, he has good weight, goes for regular checkups, maybe utilizes wearable technology. He feels lucky to live in this day and age. He takes care of his emotional and physical health. For him, eating is a spiritual function. Or maybe someone as case 2, someone who might commute for work, long commutes. He feels depressed, isolated. He feels he doesn't have time to cook a healthy meal or go to the gym. He might have diabetes. However, urbanization breeds innovation. We see it every day. Ride-sharing apps, food delivery, food preparation services, fitness trackers. But what about these wearables? Well, you might remember that the algorithms for pedometers and other wearables were modeled on walking and running, and they are less accurate for other aerobic activities. Also, adherence needs to be measured, as people are usually not compliant for longer periods of time. Let's take a look at this meta-analysis of mobile-based tech for health behavior change. This was a short study. It did show some advantages, such as significant improvement in smoking cessation. However, it showed little to no effect for weight management, diabetes, and physical activities. So it means that if you are someone who likes to exercise, you will do so without being prompted by a device. Let's take a look at changes in life expectancy. Life expectancy is the most used indicator to assess population's health. And looking at this graph, we see that the life expectancy increased all over the world. You might remember the 2014 review on urbanization in developing countries. It showed that life expectancy was positively but not significantly associated with urbanization. This indicator, life expectancy, tells us about the length of life, but not the quality of life. We live longer, but are we happier? And what is the secret to living a long, happy life? Well, let's look at people from Okinawa, Japan, which is home to the largest group of centenarians per capita. When they were asked, what is the secret to living a long, happy life? They said, it's about eating your vegetables, connecting with nature, surrounding yourself with family and friends, manifesting love, compassion, helping others, but also drinking sake every night and going to bed early. This is my last slide and just a few takeout points. Urbanization is growing, and the effect on health of urbanization is double-edged. Modern city life is perceived as stressful, and stress can trigger mental disorders. And in less developed countries, urbanization opened the door to Western diseases. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me directly. I would love to hear from you, and I will try to answer your questions and maybe share more ideas, discuss further. Thank you all. Have a great day, everyone.